All right, welcome everyone to our inaugural history weekend here at the Greenbrier. We're really excited about what we have going on here throughout the weekend, and glad that you're here to be a part of it. We were looking for sort of some wintertime programming and what we could do to really make the wintertime exciting here. And I know all of our eyes and a lot of you and a lot of people around, there's nothing more exciting than celebrating the Greenbrier's wonderful history. And then our next step was to find this guy, and he's been running around town everywhere. We couldn't find him, so we had to track him down to be a part of it. But we've got several seminars throughout the weekend. We have the dinners, we have the cooking classes, so it's really shaping up to be a really exciting weekend. And it all gets kicked off with this. So we're going to learn a little bit more about Dorothy Draper, and then want to introduce, for those of you who don't know Dr. Bob, this is our historian emeritus, Dr. Bob Conte. Came here in 1978 to clean up the archives, and then he just never left, and we couldn't get rid of him. And he kept hanging around, and he was here 43 years as our historian, retired in 2022. But if there's anybody that knows anything about Dorothy Draper or anything at the Greenbrier, it's Dr. Bob. So, Bob, thank you for being here.
Now, I'm just going to sort of throw in a few remarks.
Do you need a microphone, or can everybody hear okay?
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes. I have trouble hearing.
And then over here is Alyssa Erskine. She is a 2017 WVU graduate with a degree in fashion, dress, and merchandising. She came to the Greenbrier right after her graduation and held several jobs, but right now she is a project manager for Greenbrier Interiors. So in that role, she has learned a great deal about Dorothy Draper, and by shadowing Dr. Bob and going through the mess he left in his office. So he learned a lot.
I maintained that mess for 43 years. It was messy when I left as when I got there, so I shifted papers.
And now I'm shifting it to being on the computer. So everything will be digitalized.
So, and then I am Cam Huffman. I'm the Public Relations Director here at the Greenbrier. So happy to be hosting these and learn more, and increase my knowledge about these topics as I question these two. So we'll get started here going through Dorothy Draper. And the first thing is, who was Dorothy Draper? And Alyssa, I know you have several important facts about her upbringing and what led her to being who she was.
Yep. So she was born in Tuxedo Park, New York. She was born on November 22nd of 1889. And I think this is one of the most interesting facts. Her great-grandfather, Oliver Walcott, signed the Declaration of Independence. So I thought that was a pretty neat fact. Her mother was the first woman to ride astride instead of side saddle in Tuxedo Park, so that was a pretty big step. Another neat thing is that she liked to decorate with color because of something that had happened in her hometown. She was locked in a cellar when she was a young girl with one of her friends, and they were trapped in there for hours and they couldn't get them out. And she says that it was in Carlton's book that she decorated with color because she was scared of the dark being trapped in there for so long. So that was always something very neat to me. What else do you have?
Dr. Bob, I know you had talked some about, and I had read in my research of Dorothy Draper, I've heard you say as well, that she was really well traveled as a youth and went a lot of places, went to Europe regularly, and that probably influenced, she got to see a lot of different style, and that probably influenced her design vision.
Yeah, she was definitely a child of privilege. I mean, she was from a well-to-do family. Tuckerman was her maiden name, and her father was a successful businessman there in New York. I think real estate. In fact, one of her first projects was the Carlisle in New York, and I have a feeling that her father might have been one of the owners of the Carlisle. It's one of the things I sort of put together. How did she get a pretty prestigious hotel as one of her first projects? This may have had something to do with it. And she was called Star around the family. She was the family had a lot of hopes for her, and she lived up to being a star. And Tuxedo Park was this enclave outside New York and you could commute by train, very exclusive, sort of America's first walled community, you might say. So yeah, she did travel a lot with her parents down in, there's a famous picture of her down in Palm Beach with a big hat. Got a great picture of her. So yeah, she got around.
And her husband, George, was a personal physician to FDR.
Right.
And
So when FDR was struck with polio at Campobello, right? Well, where did that come from? That's who treated him.
And as we start to move into her early design career, I know that some of the research I did, her and her husband actually bought and sold houses, and she redecorated them. And that's kind of how she started with her decoration. And a lot of her friends saw some of the houses, wanted to hire her to do their houses, and that's how she sort of got started. And then she opened the Architectural Clearinghouse in 1925, was really her start into design. And then she was hired in 1930 to redecorate the Carlisle Hotel, as Dr. Bob said just a minute ago, and that was really the start. At that point, I think they changed the name of the company in 1929, the Dorothy Draper Company, and then she's hired to do the Carlisle, and that's really how she became well known, and then several other projects at the time as well.
And this year they'll be celebrating their 100th anniversary of being in business.
So you actually found a document there on that Architectural Clearinghouse. I never really knew what. I think she had a lot of well-to-do friends, and that was she decorated their houses. And that may have been what Architectural Clearinghouse was really about.
And around that time as well, as you see on the right on the slideshow, she had the Ask Dorothy column, and it was in over 70 newspapers, and that really helped spread her name too, as newspapers around the country ran that column, when people went to her to ask decorating advice, and she became more and more well known. Which moves on to, how does she end up here at the Greenbrier? And it all started with the Greenbrier's role during World War II, and Dr. Bob, I'll let you go into that a little bit.
So the U.S. Army actually bought the Greenbrier. This was government property for 4 years. And so when the war was over, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow, when the war was over, the Army didn't need the hospital anymore. And this was just too much. I mean, not only this building, but back then it was a mere 7,000 acres of land. And, what were they going to do with this? And so they go back to, and incidentally, there was no arrangement that the C&O Railroad had bought this in 1910. They sold it in 1942. And when they sold it, there was no agreement that they would get it back. But I think sort of out of courtesy more than anything, the Army said, well, we'll go back to the previous, we'll give them, right of first refusal, take a chance.
At that point, when C&O buys it back, what did the hotel look like? What was obviously it had been a hospital for several years. What did it look like?
Well, it looked very much like, when you drive up, pretty much like it does today, Now it ended over here, the Crystal Dining Room. That was an auditorium. Now, if I showed you pictures of it, you would never guess this was the same room. But that was the end of the building. None of this existed. So where we are now is built in the 50s, and Colonial Hall in the 70s, and the West Virginia wing in the 60s. So none of this was here. But sort of the basic look of the Greenbrier, the front facade, the Virginia wing on the left, and the old Bath building on the right, would look pretty much the same.
How about the inside?
Very traditional, very, very traditional. I've been trying to remember all day the name of the decorating firm. Brooks was the other. Lewis.
Rormer.
Lewis.
Rormer. Louis Rormer.
Louis Rormer.
Lewis Rormer. Yeah. Okay, you win. Yeah, Lewis.
We don't have prizes, sorry.
Yeah, the building had gotten a major expansion in 1930. Went from 250 to 500 rooms. So Lewis Rormer Brooks was the name of the firm from Cleveland. Incidentally, there was always a very strong Cleveland connection. I knew a lot of people wouldn't put the Greenbrier and Cleveland in the same sentence. But I went to Case Western Reserve, Cleveland's a great place, and the railroad was headquartered in Cleveland. So I think that had a lot to do with what Rorimer Brooks did all the Statler hotels back then, before there were Statler Hiltons. Anyway, but he thought the inside should look like the outside. So the inside, the very sort of colonial, neo-colonial exterior, the inside should look like that. Not much color. Not much color.
So it's been used as a hospital, they repurchased it, obviously there's some work to do to convert it back to a hotel. And we talked about Dorothy Draper making a name for herself, so I guess she immediately became the top choice of who to bring in and redecorate this hotel.
You know, I think she was the top choice of Mrs. Robert R. Young. In many ways, the key player in this is Robert R. Young. So, you know, as I said, there was no agreement that the railroad would get this back. So they went to they said, you want it back? Well, Young was a pretty flamboyant character, and he had offices in the Chrysler Building in New York, and the headquarters of the railroad was in Terminal Tower in Cleveland. And he really, even then, they could see that passenger traffic was slowing down. And they could see the automobile, they could see airplanes were going to take away, particularly long distance. But Young thought, that the railroads could successfully compete. And so, in fact, he inaugurated this special train that was going to run from Washington to Cincinnati, and come right by here across the street. And so I think he bought the Greenbrier back, or he made the railroad buy the Greenbrier back, as part of this larger vision of the railroad staying competitive against, and they were like the equivalent of airline stewardesses on trains. And well, that part didn't work out. I mean, it turns out that passenger traffic declined rapidly, and what really is the moneymaker for this railroad is coal. And there were big coal strikes right there, and so it turns out he buys the Greenbrier, and then things don't materialize the larger picture as he wanted to. But part of the deal is he gets the Greenbrier back. Now, like most businessmen of his era, his taste was extremely conservative. Mrs. Young was Anita O'Keefe Young. She was a sister of Georgia O'Keefe, the famous painter. Now, these sisters could not have lived more disparate lives. Georgia O'Keefe is out there in the far west living his bohemian life, and sister Anita is something of a social climber, and she knew Dorothy Draper was the name. And apparently Robert R. Young was startled when he saw what Dorothy Draper did in terms of color. In fact, the story is he hired her to decorate some offices up in the Terminal Tower, get a little test run up in New York. The Terminal Tower, if you know Cleveland, was for many years the largest skyscraper west of Manhattan, 52 stories, and the C&O had the top stores, and really a incredible view up there. And so he did some rooms up there, and then she did, and that was kind of the test run, and then she got the larger contract here.
So she first comes here in December of 1946, and I understand she arrived by train, it was a rainy day, and I read somewhere this week that when she walked in the building, there was no power even in the building. She explored it by flashlight at first.
Yeah,
I also believe she had a broken leg, didn't she?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's right. There was some. I can't imagine a skiing accident.
I can't remember what it was, but I did know that she had a broken leg on that first visit.
The idea of Dorothy Draper skiing doesn't make any sense. Plus, she would have been 57 years old at this point, and she was a big name, and she had done that remarkable hotel down in Brazil that was, in many ways, on the level of the Greenbrier. Anyway. Roy Seibold, who I knew later had been on the staff, and he gets a flashlight, and they inspect the hotel by flashlight, and I don't know if she was on crutches or a wheelchair, but yeah, living along.
And then shortly after that, she decides that the theme of her redecoration is going to be rhododendron, romance and rhododendrons.
Romance and rhododendron.
It's really amazing because you still see that rhododendron everywhere you go around the Greenbrier.
Yeah.
And then a little bit about the project. I know, Alyssa, you see some numbers up there, but you have some even more numbers of just how massive the project is of stepping into this 600-room hotel and redecorating everything.
Yeah, so it was 30 miles of carpet, 15,000 rolls of wallpaper, 45,000 yards of fabric, and some of 34,000 individual decorative pieces, with also including 40,000 gallons of paint to redo the entire hotel in basically less than 2 years.
And to be honest, I didn't get the project finished on time. And we don't, since we're friends, we'll talk about this. It's something we don't publicize. She started there, as you say, in December 46. Now, the other thing, December 46, it's right after the end of World War II. We're all familiar with supply chain issues today. Well, there were major supply chain issues in the late 40s, the disruptions from the Second World War. So just getting things was an issue. And initially, they planned to open this in the fall of 47. But, didn't get done. The supply chain issues. And so it was April 1948 that they finally reopened. And as I say, Mr. Young and the head, apparently she did a presentation to the board of C&O on her plans here, and they said these are all very conservative businessmen, and they say they looked around, they said, but blue and green don't go together. Now, you probably, I don't know, I remember in high school that was the thing, blue and green didn't go together. Well, I don't know why, and you never would wear blue and green together.
Alyssa has the degree. Alyssa, why do we not wear blue and green?
I do, so I don't think I can say that I don't.
Yeah, this is definitely passe.
Royal Farm.
Yeah.
But the story is, Dorothy Draper opens the curtain and she says, look at the sky and look at the lawn. If it's good enough for God, it's good enough for me. Which gives you some idea what she thought of herself, who were her peers in the decorating world, she and God.
And I think that one of the amazing things too is we talk about the carpet, the wallpaper, and the fabric, but she was involved in every single little detail from the matchbooks to the uniform, anything that you saw when you walked in the Greenbrier, Dorothy Draper was responsible for.
I've been scanning in some of her files that I have found in his office, and she is even telling them that they need to change the color of the water hoses because the red water hoses don't look as good as the green water hoses, and that she wants them to be all changed. So like she was that specific on what things looked like because her name was behind it.
Wow.
The wrapping on the bars of soap.
Yes.
I mean,
Like it was
this is pretty obsessive.
very specific of what she wanted.
Yeah.
As we go through kind of her redesign, we're going to go into some of the specific rooms and some of the changes she made. And Alyssa, we'll start with the main dining room.
Now, I have some notes because these came from Rudy, who works with Dorothy Draper and Company. So I do know that she added all of the floor-to-ceiling shutters in the main dining room. And he said that she wanted it because they wanted to be able to close it and have more private space, but also she wanted it to be still open and airy when they were open. So you can still see them as you walk down to the main dining room. They're beautiful still. Of course, we keep up with the paint and everything. And then we did use the Draper china. She designed it with the rhododendron in the center, which I love that she did rhododendrons because it is the West Virginia state flower as well.
And then on the end there, the chandeliers hung in the main dining room, the colonnade side of the main dining room, also original to her redesign. So it's amazing that so many years later you can still see original pieces that she put into the redesign.
I always like those louvered doors, incidentally. And remember, as I was just saying, this wasn't here. So there weren't any banquet facilities. So if you were a company wanted to have a private dinner, you did it in the main dining room. And so that's, like Alyssa was saying, you can close it and give you some privacy for your dinners. And then once these things were built, for years and years, they were folded back. And really just several years ago, we started opening them again, and they're beautiful doors.
Absolutely. And then moving on to the Victorian writing room, this room probably best represents Dorothy Draper. If you go look at it today, it's the closest to the way she designed it.
And Carlton would always say that this was the most photographed room in America. Now, I don't know if that's true, but to him it was, and that's how it should be. But one fact that I love about this room is the chandelier in there can have electric. She refused to put it on there. She said that she just wanted an eye-catching piece, but she didn't need to have light above because she had the natural light coming in from the windows. So, and Dr. Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, that mirror hanging above the mantle is originally from the
old hotel.
from the old hotel.
Yeah. That's what they told me when I got here.
And that's what we're going to say.
You know, remarkably, we don't have very many photos of the inside of the old hotel.
Right.
So, and it's that chandelier. The story always was told that right before the reopening party, I mean days before, you know, they're kind of going to a final check to make sure everything's, and there was no chandelier in that room. And she had ordered that for her apartment in New York. And so she said, oh my God, you know, send it here, we'll hang it up, it'll get us through the party.
Still there.
75 years later, it's still there.
And the fireplace in there is a beautiful piece. Came from a home in New York.
Yeah.
It dates back to 1860. And then if you go in there, the fudge apron, the fabric design in there was actually designed for the Greenbrier. So she designed it after fudge makers and with all the colors on their aprons and everything. So that's where fudge apron came from.
North Parlor, another room that definitely represents Dorothy Draper and starts with the entrance to it. Those doors, those beautiful mahogany doors, were part of her redesign. The floors as well. The floors in the North Parlor are really special. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at those, but they're beautiful, beautiful floors. Kind of sets that room apart. And then another mantelpiece there came from an antique shop in New York State dating to the 1700s. So North Parlor, another.
That mantelpiece was really one of the stars of the show. And it's if you look at the figures there, it's all dedicated to Bacchus, the god of wine. So you'll see them, the little cherubs carrying casks of wine. So go drink some wine in the North Parlor. Yeah, that was really one of the, in terms of the valuable antiques she brought in, that was certainly one of them. And then, yes, she had that floor installed. I looked at pictures from the 30s, and there was some sort of carpeting in there. So, so they would install as part of the redo after the war.
Then the lobbies, obviously, she had a major impact on them. The George Washington portrait that's so famous, Alyssa, I understand there's a story behind that as well.
Yeah, I was reading it in Carlton's book, and so there used to be a different George Washington portrait hanging up, and then they were moved to the North Parlor before the war. That was one during the war, correct?
Before, back in the 30s, yeah.
And so that was actually hanging in there before that, and then when Draper came in, she found another location and wanted a larger portrait of him in there. She said it just wasn't big enough for the space.
And what's becoming a theme, another fireplace in the upper lobby. That one is really a unique piece as well.
The George Washington portrait is, of course, a copy of the famous one in the White House. You see it all the time in the East Parlor. Where on your notes to say the famous artist?
Stewart.
Stewart.
Gilbert Stewart.
There we go. Gilbert Stewart.
Gilbert Stewart.
Thanks,
I'm
Steve.
glad you're here.
I don't have Bob or Deanna's brain.
But what's different?
I only got Bob's.
What's different is that scroll that he's holding, beware foreign influences, that's not on the original. That's really very curious. I think when his daughter, what's the artist's name again?
James, his daughter.
Oh, his daughter probably did this. And probably on commission. And the person who was commissioning this was a member of, we think, the Know Nothing Party, a very anti-immigration party, and back in the 1840s, a long time ago. So I think, I'm speculating here, this person said, can you copy that painting? And while you're at it, can you pick a little political message here, which is echoing George Washington's famous farewell address, where what he said was, beware of foreign entanglements, which kind of got dumbed down to beware of foreign influences.
Then on the right there, what was once the green lobby is now the lobby bar, and that fireplace was another fireplace installed by Draper, and all the pieces were found together in a home in New York and brought here and put into that room.
Gosh, it's been 20 years since we did the lobby bar. And that was a good idea. That was one of those ideas that was really successful.
It's a busy place, stays busy.
Yeah. Originally, they had talked about taking the spring room, since it already had, a bar. And there was one faction, internally here who were promoting that. And luckily they were outvoted because it was a hit from day one.
Alyssa has mentioned a couple of these already, but here are some items that Dorothy Draper designed specifically for the Greenbrier during her redesign. And as I go through them, you guys jump in if any stories on them. But the chandelier in the cameo ballroom is a piece that gets a whole lot of attention from people.
1,800 pounds.
And I think if there's any single thing that kind of symbolized the rebirth of the Greenbrier, it was that chandelier. I mean, it was like the place to have your photo taken. And I used to say on tours, you wanted to be dancing. Back in the 50s and 60s, the Greenbrier, part of what the PR department did was take pictures of couples here and send those pictures back to your local newspaper. And that was just a routine. And man, you wanted a picture dancing under that chandelier with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor dancing over your shoulder. And man, when that appeared in the Akron Beacon Journal, you were, but yeah, that one chandelier kind of summed it all up. The romance of romance in Brooklyn.
And then the scones in that same room were sconces. Were
Scones are things you eat.
That's right. I'm hungry, Bob. It's lunchtime. Then the dolphin table in the trellis lobby.
Which what's neat is it's still in the same area, same place. Of course, it's been touched up, painted, and everything. It's still in the same place that she put it originally. So I think that's a neat fact that it's never really left that room.
Kidney sofas are found all throughout the Greenbrier. I learned what a kidney sofa was when I was putting this together. Alyssa told me, but I had plenty of examples to include in the slideshow.
The main one that you see will be the one with the blue shells up in the upper lobby, but you see them everywhere.
And then clocks. There's a pair of clocks. The one in the indoor pool at the end of the pool, and then the one in the clock lobby. And I know that there's a story about that clock as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I heard Carlson tell that story. He thought there should be a clock in the lobby, so people had a meeting plate. We'll meet you at the clock. It's amazing sitting around Carlson. He would just sort of throw these things out every now and then. Oh yeah, I walked by that clock 1,000 times at that point, and it never dawned on me that there was actually a reason why it was there.
Then we talked about the table in the trellis lobby, but the one in the upper lobby as well has been there since the redesign. It was put in by Draper. Again, we go back to that fireplace thing.
Which a lot of people say there is a face on the mantle. They do say that it's Dorothy Draper. Nobody's ever been able to say that 100%, but
Carlton told me it wasn't her, but it was a face on a sculptor in her apartment in New York.
okay.
And then we get to the celebrity corridor bust. Bob, I'm glad you're here because I have heard conflicting stories on these over the years. So what is your story on who these busts are?
I have heard conflicting stories over the years. And I just sort of threw my hands up at some point. I give up, you know.
Now, in the green and white video, Carlton tells you who they are. In the green and white video, or at least he tries to tell you who they are.
Right. And Carlton did say that there's like a little scrap of paper and where she said who was which president. I mean, that would make sense that they're the first 10 presidents.
Just a little more handsome.
And I can recognize Washington and Jefferson. And probably, incidentally, I had an art history guy come through here. Probably what happened was Dorothy Draper would hire artists in New York, and they would work from paintings. And I can sort of recognize that Jefferson is right by where you go in the ladies' room, and he has a stole, and I can almost recognize the painting that came from. Incidentally, one of the weirdest stories I ever had was a woman called me up once, and she said, I know a secret at the Greenbrier. Oh, tell me. And she says, I know who did those busts. And I said, well, oh, great. And so he told me the guy's name, who I, of course, can't remember. And but the point was that the person whose name I can't remember was an art student in New York in the late 40s. And so he was struggling, he was just starting out, and Dorothy Draper hired him to do these busts. Well, he went on to have a long, prosperous career as a sculptor. In fact, he was the head of the art history department of the University of California at Santa Cruz. You know, I grew up in California, and it turns out I drove by one of his sculptors in Saratoga for many years. I mean, it kind of stood out in front of a winery. I can't remember his name, but I remember the sculptor in Saratoga. Anyway, the point is, he was mortally embarrassed and ashamed that he had sold out when he was a young, struggling, and he commercialized his talents. And he told, this woman was his ex-wife, that's right. And he told her that he could never tell anybody, she could never tell anybody while he was alive. He must have been dead 20 minutes, and she called me up and told me the story. Now, of course, I said, I mean, now that's great, but who are they? She didn't know.
And then on the right side of the slide, there's 3 different patterns that Dorothy Draper created, especially for the Greenbrier. Alyssa, do you have any more information on any of them?
Well, we already talked about that room. The Zinfandel lily, I don't have much information on. You can see them in the garden room right off of the upper lobby. And then, of course, the rhododendrons you see everywhere around here. It's kind of a staple piece of here.
There's a few different patterns of the rhododendron as well, right?
There is now. So Sebastian opened up Carlton V Limited, which is, Sebastian is Carlton's son. And so he made it a little more subdued. So those are the versions. Now you can...
There's different background colors.
There are different background colors. So this one, typically what you see is the aqua color that you see around the hotel. But there are some more that are a little subdued that came from Carlton V Limited.
Well, the original is the white, where our offices are, with the white background. And every corridor in the hotel had that white background with the rhododendron on it. And then the mint, the aqua,
Yep.
is a variation you see going to the spot.
Yep.
But that's only 20 years old, so that's the new version.
So now we come to 1948, and all these projects have been completed, as Dr. Bob said, maybe a little longer than expected. But we're ready for reopening, and as you can see, some of the actual posters that Alyssa has hanging around the room, it was heavily promoted when it was time for that reopening.
In fact, the one on the left is hanging right as you're going down the shop corridor. And if you read the small text, it says opening this fall. So that was 1947. I think they had to retract that ad because apparently the swimming pool was an issue. For some reason, today's the draping isn't there.
No, today it's original.
Okay. Yeah, Dorothy Draper had a fabric over the pool. But apparently it rotted pretty quickly from the humidity there. But yeah, what's interesting, they look at that ad on the left, it says, we'll see you this fall. Well, turned out to be April.
The ad on the left too, the quote at the bottom there, I thought it was interesting. It says that the Greenbrier has fulfilled its wartime mission to our government and is now ready to open back up. I mentioned Dorothy Draper there, and just an interesting verbiage there on that one.
It's sort of interesting. It turns out, the Second World War was a chance to totally re-envision, the inside of this place and kind of give the whole, and at one time, to completely redo it. Which apparently is happening in the Waldorf Astoria right now. It won't be long before the Waldorf is going to open. It's been closed since 2017. Now, of course, it's going to be much fewer guest rooms, and there will be, I'm sure, wildly expensive apartments in the old Waldorf.
So now we come to the reopening party, April 15th through 18th, 1948. Life magazine called it the most lavish on-the-house party of the century. And it was more than $12 billion that was invested in repurchasing and renovating the property. And they set aside $65,000 for this reopening party, which in 1948 was quite a number. And you guys, I know, have some facts on just who was there at the party, everything that went on.
Well, the Kennedy sisters were there.
And John Kennedy was there, but John Kennedy was sort of like a nobody at that point. I think he'd just been elected to, and he had three beautiful sisters. They got all the pictures, and John Kennedy was this kind of guy over the side over there. But really, I struggle to convey the importance of 4 pages in Life magazine in 1948. It's hard for people to imagine today that everybody saw Life magazine. If you didn't subscribe to it, your Aunt Louisville did, or it was in your dentist's office. It was everywhere. I can't think of anything in terms of a PR coup.
Right.
This is up there with a bunker. In terms of just the number of eyeballs who saw the Greenbrier, this reopening, this incredible party.
And I know Alyssa has a list there too. That wasn't the only magazine or publication that was here.
No, Forbes was here, Luce, Pulitzer, Oaks, Paley, many different.
And I think it's mentioned on there, Town and Country, Harper's Bazaar.
Yeah.
So they were the publicity that it received as a PR guy. I can't even imagine it. It's just
now Robert R. Young was savvy. This was he knew this was a major PR event, and again, today it's hard to realize that when railroads had so much passenger traffic, they had big time public relations firm. You have Steve, is it a letter with Thomas Deegan's?
Yeah.
He's writing to the White House?
Yes. That's 53, yeah.
Yeah, so Thomas Deegan's was the head of PR for the railroad. And then incidentally, he later goes on to, he ran the New York World's Fair in the mid-1960s. And he hired a guy named Howard Skidmore. And Howard was a newspaper guy, and Deegan's hired him right before this party to work for PR up in Cleveland. And I got to know Howard Skidmore later. He retired just about the time I started here, right around Ryder Cup. And he would come back, Howard would come back, he retired out to California, Carmel, and he would come back to go to the clinic. Well, apparently he was a big deal because he was head of PR for the railroad, but once he retired, nobody paid him any attention except me, because he had all these great stories, and we'd have lunch every time he was here. But he was sort of this humble reporter on a local newspaper, a New York newspaper. He gets his job with the railroad, and one of the first events he's involved in is this incredible party. And it was like, whoa, my God, what am I, I thought I'm working for a railroad. And he comes down to Duke and Duchess of Windsor at this party. Remember, he's one of the few people I guess I talked to who was actually at that party, and I remember one of his comments was that how the poor Duke and Duchess of Windsor have taken it on the chin with the program, and but at least people know who they are.
The crown is what you're looking for.
Right, the crown. There we go. And but I remember him using the word electrifying when they walked in the room. These were like the most famous people on the planet, and they were personal friends of Robert R. Young. That was the connection.
What all, I think we get on the next slide to some more of the people that are here, but what all went on during those 3 or 4 days of the party? I know there was a Pro-Am golf event, there's the ball that we actually are recreating tonight in the Cameo Ballroom. What else happened at that party?
Dorothy Draper gave tours. You know, I've always thought that the tours we give here are kind of descendants of Dorothy Draper giving these tours, personally giving the tours here. Of course, there was golf. You know, Ben Hogan and Bing Crosby playing golf together. You know, is there a picture of that there? Oh yeah, there's Bing Crosby. And the Kennedy sisters on the left there. You know, Mr. Young committed suicide actually. Mr. Young, Mr. and Mrs. Young, they had one daughter, and she was killed in an accident in her early 20s. I can't remember if it was an auto accident or an airplane accident. And people said Mr. Young was never the same after that happened. And but Mrs. Young lived for many. They had a house. They were kind of like neighbors of Mar-a-Lago down in Palm Beach, you know, and then the Kennedys had the next compound. That's why the Kennedy family was here, because they were like Mr. Young's neighbor down in Palm Beach. And I say all that because Mrs. Young lived until the 1980s. Their house isn't there anymore down in Palm Beach, and somehow she had a scrapbook from this party. And she gave it to her lawyer, and then her lawyer knew somebody at CSX. And anyway, that neat picture on the left there of the 3 Kennedy sisters, Patricia, Eunice, and Kathleen. Kathleen is the one, maybe if you know the story, is killed in an airplane crash 3 weeks after that picture was taken in the south of France. And Elsa Maxwell, a new biography. In fact, I think a miniseries is coming out on Elsa Maxwell. I just seen something. She was like the great party giver in New York and at the Waldorf, and you wanted to go to Elsa Maxwell. Anyway, these pictures came from this scrapbook that made this circuitous route from Mrs. Young to the lawyer to somebody at CSX to it's somewhere in our files.
And the picture of the Duke of Windsor on the drums there, I understand that created quite a stir.
Oh, yeah. That was, so the guy standing there, that's Meyer Davis. Now, Meyer Davis, I hope nobody remembers his name anymore, but Meyer Davis had a whole series of orchestras. They always played at the inaugural balls for years and years, the Meyer Davis Orchestra. They provided all the musicians here. Now, Meyer Davis himself only showed up for the big events. And people will say it's a very Meyer Davis thing that he got right in the middle of this picture here with the Duke of Windsor. Back in 1919, when the Duke of Windsor was just the Prince of Wales, Meyer Davis was here. And Meyer Davis remembered that in 1919, 30 years before this party, they had gotten the Prince of Wales to play drums. So Meyer Davis says, "Will you play the drums again?" Well, as you imagine, with all this media here, the former King of England playing the drums was a picture, and really that picture showed up in more publications than any other. The guy on the right playing the violin is Walter Scott. Oh. Walter Scott the third. Now, if you've been coming here for years, you remember Walter Scott, who retired not too long ago, playing at tea and playing in the main dining room. So our Walter Scott is his son. I remember meeting Walter Scott Sr. and asking about this, that apparently the Duke of Windsor leaned over to the other musicians and said, "You know I can't play these bloody things at all." And they all just nodded because it was very clear this guy couldn't play those bloody things at all.
But I read somewhere about that picture that, as you said, it appeared everywhere, but he was a bit nervous about it getting out there at first, as you said, like the former King of England playing drums.
Right.
But that it was really well received, and people loved it when it did.
It wasn't quite the dignified photo.
Right. Our next slide is actually a video. Some of you may have seen it, but it's a video that was made in 1948 of a visit to the Greenbrier. So I thought it was kind of important to include it, to kind of get a feel for what it was like after it reopened.
At White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, is the most celebrated of the historic watering places around which much of the history of fashionable Southern society has revolved since the country was young. Though today White Sulphur is seldom thought of as a health resort, it was the curative properties of the spring water which gave the place its tremendous vogue throughout the last century. To be seen at Old White during the season was a social obligation few of the South's men and women of fashion felt able to ignore. Everyone who was anyone in those days flocked there annually to take the cure and to join in the smart life of the hotel which grew up around the springs. Guests of the Greenbrier Hotel today are frequently lodged in the old cottages, many of them dating from 150 years ago, which have housed such celebrated historical figures as Clay, Calhoun, and the great Robert E. Lee. 13 presidents of the United States have also stayed there. It was at White Sulphur almost a century ago that the governor of North Carolina made his immortal remark to the governor of South Carolina: "It's a long time between drinks." And here the mint julep, one of the famed contributions of the South to good living, was invented and brought to full perfection. In the smart world of today, among people whose doings are reported and photographed, the Greenbrier Hotel still occupies a unique position. Its gala reopening after several war years, during which it had been taken over by the government, was an event which made social news and focused attention once more on the little village in the West Virginia hills. From the trim little station at White Sulphur to the Greenbrier Hotel is only a short distance, but all the trains are met by an antique, though spotlessly polished coach, maintained by the hotel in memory of the days when any purposeful exertion was considered unbecoming a gentleman or his lady. Since the war, the Greenbrier has been redone inside and out and has emerged as one of the handsomest resorts in the Western Hemisphere. The reconversion was the work of one of America's most widely known decorators, Dorothy Draper, whose designs are marked by the bold use of massed color. Though Greenbrier's decorative scheme is new, its clientele remains basically much what it has always been. Traveled people of means and background, industrialists and bankers, and well-known public figures like Clark Clifford, White House confidant and advisor during most of the Truman administration. But for all the elegance indoors, life at Greenbrier goes on mostly outdoors. Since the hotel grounds are some 7,000 acres in area, there's plenty of room for everyone and for every open-air pursuit. In the daytime, most activities center around the casino, a deluxe country club the hotel maintains just for its guests. There are 6 clay courts built for championship tennis, where any enthusiastic weekenders who want to can perfect their backhand stroke. And there are acres of porch and terrace, where those whose interest in the sporting life is more academic can work up a becoming tan, while watching Prince Alexander Hohenlohe and some of his friends run through a few fast sets of mixed doubles. days, Greenbrier appears so often in the glossier magazines as a background for notables that it is taking on some of the familiarity of a national landmark. A sunny day may find Jerome Zerby snapping Mrs. Igor Cassini, or a lineup of newsreel and still cameramen concentrating on such eminent personalities as J. Arthur Rank, famed British film magnate, His Royal Highness the Duke of Windsor, and former Senator Burton K. Wheeler of Montana, while the Duchess of Windsor and Miss Grace Amory watch from the sidelines. Among those who may be found basking in the sun at Greenbrier are such socially prominent personalities as Mrs. Dolly Dorellis and John Jacob Astor III, Ottavio Prochet, and Mrs. Byron C. Foy. Frequent visitors as well are the Winston Guests and Michael Phipps, the John Sims Kellys, and Mrs. Fulton Cutting, Jr. In the tournaments at Greenbrier are many of the great names of golf. But there are equally well-known personalities in the gallery. Mrs. Lucille Vanderbilt and Mrs. Nicholas DuPont may be found in one of the many groups of spectators. And there are scores of others whose names make frequent copy for newspaper columnists. At Greenbrier tournaments, there is almost always a large and faithful following right around the 18 holes, especially when the foursome includes Bing Crosby and golfers Chris Dunphy and Van Hogan. For the audience is reasonably certain that when Bing is in good form, something is sure to happen sooner or later that will make the trip well worthwhile. Though he is only an amateur at golf, Bing is a professional at low comedy whose antics add immeasurably to the fun at Greenbrier. Back at the hotel as the afternoon ends, the day's big push begins for most of the staff. At the Greenbrier, dinner is looked upon as an occasion, not just a routine operation. It is handled like the important and pleasant part of civilized existence that it can and should be. On Saturday nights, the dining room is in top form, with every woman wearing her smartest gown and her most treasured jewels. At the next table may be the John Jacob Astors and their guests. Climax of the weekend is the Saturday night ball, held in the Greenbrier's elegantly decorated Rose Ballroom. Glistening with crystal and gilt, lit in a subdued key to give every woman the agreeable feeling that she looks her best, it is one of the most beautiful ballrooms in the country, and a perfect background for a Strauss waltz, danced by the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. There are always a few tireless dancers who keep things going until the last possible moment, and by the time the ball is over, it is invariably close to dawn. For weekenders, Sunday is departure time, a time which comes all too soon. But hotel records show that few Greenbrier guests ever spend but a single weekend at White Sulphur. For one weekend has a way of leading to another, and the trains that take guests away seem always to bring them back sooner or later, to the green and lovely lawns, to the leafy hills, and the clear, warm sky of Old White.
I run the YouTube page, which if you're not following, please do. But I monitor it each week to see who's watching which videos. Every single week, that's our top video on YouTube. Every week.
Well, you asked what happened at the reopening party, that was it.
There you go. So after Dorothy Draper, Carlton Varney joined the Dorothy Draper Company in 1960. Worked hand in hand with her. In 1964, he took over the company and then became responsible for the interior design here until his passing in 2022. So although Dorothy Draper is responsible for the design, Carlton kept it going longer than Draper was here by far. So his fingerprints, like Draper's, are all over the resort. And our last slide just kind of shows what we're just talking about today. These are pictures of today, and you can still see that classic Dorothy Draper design that has been here since that 1948 reopening. And we're super proud of it, and it's something that we try to pass on to our guests and pass on the story. So